How Easy You Are to Knead by PaigePenn. Chapter 2. Quality Time Together. They didn't start on the meal until late afternoon. "Would you rather do a lot of stirring or chop stuff up?" Patton asked, gathering the things that they needed. "Chop what up?" Virgil asked back, following him around. "Turkey." Patton had stored the leftover turkey meat in a cold underground space outside, not unlike a cellar, but not attached to the house, to help preserve it without having to smoke, salt, and dry it like Roman was doing with the rest of the turkeys. Now he set the stone container on the counter next to a cutting board and a knife. "It's cold, but more interesting than stirring. We can trade off in the middle, though, so if you change your mind, we can swap whenever." "I'll cut the turkey up," Virgil decided. "How big do you need the pieces?" Patton demonstrated for him, and Virgil set to cutting up the rest of the turkey. Patton, meanwhile, lit the stove, set a pot on top, and made a mix of oil, a bit of flour, and a large jar of cloudy brown liquid, stirring it all together with a long wooden spoon. "What are you making?" "Gravy," Patton answered cheerfully. "Like we had last night?" "Yep, except instead of putting it on potatoes, we're making turkey a la king." Virgil didn't know what that was. "Okay." While he cut up the rest of the meat, Patton continued to stir the gravy, and finally Virgil asked, "Isn't it combined enough yet?" Patton turned to him with a small sound of surprise and then explained, "Oh, this isn't to combine it, it needs to thicken, and I'm stirring it to keep it moving so the bottom doesn't burn." "Oh." Virgil turned back to his work, finishing in silence. "I cut it all up," he announced. "Good work," Patton praised, and Virgil smiled. "Do you want to work on the biscuits next? That's what we're going to pour the gravy over." "I don't know how to make biscuits," Virgil answered, but Patton was undaunted. "That's okay, I do," he said. "You'll need to get a mixing bowl out. They're in that cabinet over there." So, with Patton directing him, Virgil mixed together a biscuit dough. It was a somewhat messy process, and he got flour on himself, the counter, and the floor, but Virgil enjoyed himself nonetheless. "Is it supposed to look like this?" Virgil asked, bringing the bowl over to where Patton still stood, stirring the gravy. "Yep," Patton grinned brightly at him. "Now you just gotta shape the biscuits and put them on the baking tray. Trays are in that cabinet." Again he pointed. "And there's two ways to shape them. You can either roll the dough out and cut it with the rim of a glass or a knife, or shape them by hand." "What shape are they supposed to be?" Virgil asked, getting the baking tray out. Patton shrugged. "Depends. If you cut it with a cup, they'll be circles. If you use a knife, they can be anything, but we usually do squares, diamonds, or triangles, because they're the easiest. I did do hexagons once, which was fun, but that was tricky." "And if I shape them by hand?" Patton grinned again. "Then whatever you feel like. But roughly circular is the easiest, because you just have to make a ball and squish it flat." Virgil decided to do that one. "How big?" "Do you want me to show you?" Patton offered, and Virgil immediately nodded. "Okay, just take over the stirring for me for a moment, please." Virgil came over, and Patton handed him the handle of the spoon. Virgil did his best to imitate the way Patton had been moving it in the pot earlier, and it must have been close enough, because Patton didn't correct his style. Instead, he went over to where Virgil had been working. Before Patton touched the dough, he grabbed a handful of flour out of the flour jar and sprinkled it across the baking tray. "So it doesn't stick," he explained. Then he took a portion of dough, rolled it in his hands, squished it between them, and then showed the result to Virgil. "Ta-da! A biscuit." Virgil nodded, and Patton put the biscuit on the tray and took the spoon back. "Go ahead." Virgil's first attempt was too small, but his second try was much better. He continued to form the biscuits, putting them on the tray until he ran out of dough. The tray was only about half full, though. "Oh," said Patton, "you'll want to space them out a bit more. Try to spread them evenly across the whole tray." Thankfully, the biscuits didn't stick to the tray and were not hard to move. Soon Virgil had them rearranged. "Good job," Patton praised again. "Okay, now they go in the oven." Virgil looked at it hesitantly, and Patton added, "I can put them in if you want." Virgil nodded, coming to take the spoon again. Patton picked up the tray of biscuits, opened the oven, and slid them in among the flames. While Patton was doing that, Virgil noticed that it was harder to stir the gravy than it had been. "I think it thickened," he said. Patton looked. "So it did." Leaving Virgil stirring, he went to the pile of chopped turkey and brought it over. Careful not to spill, he added the meat to the gravy. After he'd set the cutting board down again, he took back the spoon. "As soon as the biscuits are done, we'll be ready to eat." "How long do the biscuits need to cook?" "About 15 minutes. Patton shifted the pot so that it was on a slightly cooler part of the stove top, still stirring the gravy. It looked quite thick now, especially with the chunks of meat in it. After a few minutes, Patton removed the gravy from the heat entirely and let it sit without stirring. "Do you want to find the others and tell them to wash up for dinner, or shall I?" "I'll do it," Virgil said, and went off to find them. Roman was practicing his sword work in the yard. Virgil stood at a distance and hollered his name. Roman turned, smiling and breathing hard. "Hi, Virgil." "Patton says you have to wash your hands if you want food." "Oh, okay." Roman sheathed his sword, coming inside. He went to the kitchen, and Virgil wandered off through the house to find Logan. It didn't take him long. Logan was holed up in the room with the bookshelves, his attention singularly focused on the book in his hand. "Logan?" Virgil asked softly, standing at the doorway. Logan didn't respond. "Logan," Virgil said again, a bit louder this time. Logan looked up, and for a moment it was clear his mind was still far distant. But then he turned and saw Virgil. "Hello," he said. "Supper is about ready," Virgil said. "Patton says you have to wash up first." "Best do that, then," Logan said with a smile, setting his book aside and getting up. Virgil followed him back to the kitchen, where they both washed their hands. Patton got the tray of biscuits out of the hot oven, stacking them on a plate instead. "Virgil made the biscuits," he told everyone. "They look good, Virgil," Logan complimented, handing plates and forks out. "Yeah," Roman agreed, grabbing one. He crumbled it onto his plate, ladled some gravy over the top, and took that out to the living room. Virgil glanced to the others to confirm that this was how they were supposed to eat the dish. Logan was already crumbling his own biscuit, and Patton nodded to the pile. "Go ahead," he said. Virgil took a biscuit and, mimicking his friends, crumbled it onto his plate. Then he too ladled gravy over it and went to join Roman and Logan in the living room. Patton followed a moment later, and they all settled comfortably into the furniture. Virgil tried a bite. "I like turkey a la king," he decided aloud. "Good," Patton said with a grin. "We like it too." The other two nodded in agreement. Virgil had 3 servings.